At 10:26 local time, over the Sea of Azov, a single Ukrainian Luty drone was screaming toward a target that Russia couldn't afford to lose. This Russian Il-38N aircraft was the only platform Russia had in the Black Sea capable of detecting their new weapon. Satellite imagery from 6 hours ago showed ground crews already removing engine covers. The Il-38N would be flight ready by 1300. This was their only shot to take it out before it got airborne. The clock was already running out. At 10:31, the Luty crossed the Ukrainian coastline and descended to 50 meters above the gray winter water. Ahead lay 280 kilometers of open sea. At 220 kilometers per hour, the crossing would take 76 minutes. 76 minutes of total silence. The drone's composite airframe shattered radar energy in every direction, except back toward Russian stations. It was like throwing a handful of glitter instead of using a mirror to see yourself. At 50 meters altitude, the Earth's curvature did the rest. Radar waves travel in straight lines, but the Earth does not cooperate. The drone was flying below the horizon, invisible to every Russian radar within 200 kilometers. For over an hour, it might as well not have existed. Everything seemed to be a routine operation until it crossed over land again. At 11:47, the drone made landfall east of Primorsko-Akhtarsk. It was 70 kilometers to Yeysk, with 19 minutes to impact. The invisible phase was over. Now came the part where Russia got a vote. 3 seconds after crossing the coastline, that silence ended. If you look at this cellular tower outside the village of Staroshcherbinovskaya, you will see what looks like standard telecom equipment. A gray cylinder is bolted to the frame, roughly the size of a coffee thermos. Inside are 4 omnidirectional microphones and a processor running classification algorithms. It is clever, but clever only works if your enemy does not know about it. This is Russia's answer to radar-evading drones. You cannot see what flies below the radar horizon, but you can hear it. The Luty's turbojet engine does not care about stealth. The engine produces 85 decibels at 100 meters, which is the sound of a motorcycle at highway speed. Compressor blades create a high-pitched whistle between 4,000 and 8,000 hertz. Combustion adds a lower rumble between 200 and 500 hertz. In the cold December air, that sound carries far. Dense air transmits acoustic energy more efficiently than warm air. The microphone picked up the first traces at 11:47. Signal strength was 53 decibels. This is faint, but well above the 35 decibel ambient noise of a rural Russian winter morning. Russia had built microphones sensitive enough to catch the slightest sound. The algorithm had found its needle in the haystack. The processor performed a fast Fourier transform, breaking the incoming sound into its component frequencies. It is like separating a musical chord into individual notes. The algorithm matched the spectral fingerprint against its database. It identified the whistle of compressor blades and the combustion rumble. These specific ratios distinguish turbojets from propellers. Classification returned in 1.3 seconds. UAV confidence was 87%. At a bearing of 245 degrees. One microphone gives direction, but it does not give distance. The drone could be 2 kilometers out or 10. It is like knowing someone is shouting from the east, but not knowing if they are in your yard or on the next block. However, Russia has over 200 of these sensors along the Krasnodar coast, spaced 3 to 5 kilometers apart. Within 8 seconds, 3 more microphones reported. Bearings came in at 248, 251, and 243 degrees. The fusion algorithm computed where those lines intersected. This is basic trigonometry, but performed thousands of times per second. A track appeared. Hostile UAV position was accurate to 50 meters, updating every 2 to 3 seconds. The Luty had no idea, and it would not have mattered if it did. The drone carried no acoustic warning system, as such a device does not exist for aircraft of this size. The Skynode S flight computer showed all systems normal. Target coordinates were locked. The network tracking its every move might as well have been tracking a ghost that didn't know it was already dead. There were 67 kilometers to Yeysk and 18 minutes to impact. There was still enough time, provided nothing else went wrong. The microphones could follow the Luty across Krasnodar, but they could not shoot it down. For that, Russia needed a different weapon. At 11:52, 5 minutes after the microphones found the drone, the track data reached a Tor M2 battery. The battery was stationed 18 kilometers southeast of the drone's position, well within the system's range. The Tor M2 is Russia's short-range answer to exactly this threat. It features 8 missiles on a tracked chassis and radar that can track 48 objects simultaneously. On paper, the Luty was already finished. The battery commander had solid coordinates from the acoustic network. He slewed his fire control radar to the general direction and searched for the target. Nothing appeared. He had position data accurate to 50 meters, and his radar could track a bird at 25 kilometers. Yet the screen showed an empty sky. The problem was the elevation angle. The TOR's fire control radar needs to look at least 1.5 degrees above the horizon. Any lower and ground reflections would overwhelm the return signal. Radar waves bounce off the terrain, creating false echoes that the processor cannot separate from real targets. The system was designed for aircraft and helicopters flying at hundreds of meters. Nobody planned for a drone at 30 meters. At 18 kilometers, a target flying at 30 meters sits at an elevation angle of 0.1 degrees. It is essentially on the horizon. The radar was staring straight into ground clutter, and the drone was buried within it. The commander did the math. For his radar to see a target at 30 meters altitude, that target needed to be within 1.2 kilometers. At 180 kilometers per hour, the Luty would cross that window in just 24 seconds. He would have one chance if the drone flew directly toward his position. But it wasn't. The Luty was heading northeast, crossing in front of him rather than approaching. He tracked the acoustic data as it updated. Range 16 kilometers, then 15. The drone was getting closer, but the geometry was not improving. The track would pass 4 kilometers north of his position, never entering the narrow window where his radar could acquire it. At 11:55, the acoustic network showed it at 12 kilometers, bearing northeast at 175 kilometers per hour. The Tor's radar still showed nothing but frozen farmland and interference patterns. At 11:57, the track crossed behind his engagement envelope entirely. The range was opening. The drone was now heading away. This one flew under the radar, literally 47 kilometers to Yeysk, 12 minutes to impact. The Luty had slipped past the acoustic network through terrain masking and past the TOR through geometry and physics. But something else had been hunting it since before it crossed the coast. Something that did not care about elevation angles or radar horizons. 40 kilometers to the west, that weapon was already airborne. A Duran 2 launched from a position near Temryuk at 10:50. This was 3 minutes after the Luty took off. Russian standing orders kept armed interceptors orbiting whenever satellite warning indicated Ukrainian launch activity. A Luty leaving a Zaporizhia runway triggered the alert. The Duran was airborne before the Ukrainian drone reached the coast. But this was no normal Duran. If you look at the top of the fuselage, where the delta wing meets the engine housing, you will see something unusual. It is a 9K-333 Verba missile in a modified launcher tube held by aluminium brackets bolted to the airframe. Russia had turned a one-way attack drone into an airborne SAM platform. It was the drone equivalent of duct taping a shotgun to a lawnmower. Ugly, improvised, and just stupid enough to work. The Duran 2 is an Iranian design built under Russian license, essentially a Shahed 136 with Cyrillic stencils. It has a delta wing, a pusher propeller, and a 4-cylinder piston engine producing 50 horsepower. Its cruise speed is 185 kilometers per hour, with a normal endurance of over 4 hours. The armed variant, however, is different. The Verba system adds 12 kilograms. That extra weight cuts loader time to 90 minutes. If you look at the mounting hardware, you will see 2 black boxes near the launcher tube. These are servo motors. One controls the protective cover over the missile seeker, while the other actuates the firing trigger. Cables run into the fuselage, taped to the skin. This means the operator does not fire with a simple button press. He sends commands through a mesh network, where signals hop between relay drones and ground stations. Each node passes data to the next until it reaches the drone. First command, open the cover. Second, align the drone. Third, fire. By 11:47, when the Luty made landfall, it had been airborne for roughly 60 minutes. There were 30 minutes of fuel remaining, one missile, and one target, hiding in a 400-meter acoustic blur. The Duran received acoustic track data. Hostile UAV bearing 095, range 38 kilometers, heading northeast. The operator adjusted course eastward, descending to 600 meters, and began searching. 47 kilometers to Yeisk, 15 minutes of fuel remaining. The clock was running for both sides now. But finding a drone at 30 meters altitude in an irrigation canal is not like finding an aircraft against an open sky. The Verba's seeker needs contrast, a hot target against a cold background. Against the sky, a 400-degree exhaust contrasts sharply with minus 15-degree air. That allows for easy acquisition at 6 kilometers. Against the ground, everything changes. Frozen farmland is at minus 3 degrees, while plowed fields warm to plus 5 degrees. This creates a complex thermal tapestry that all 3 seeker channels must distinguish from the target. The operator searched for 6 minutes. His camera showed frozen fields, bare trees, and the dark line of a canal. The acoustic network said the target was somewhere in a 400-meter ellipse, but somewhere is not a firing solution. There were 12 minutes of fuel left. The canal ended ahead. The Luty would have to climb. When it climbed, everything would change. At 11:59, the canal ended, and open farmland rose toward the northeast. There was no terrain left to hide behind. The Luty's profile called for minimal exposure. Stay low, stay fast, and never silhouette against the sky for more than seconds. The Skynode S identified farm buildings 2 kilometers ahead. With metal roofs and thermal clutter, if the drone reached those buildings before climbing, the background might mask its signature. It almost worked. At 12:07, a ridgeline blocked the path with no route around. The drone pulled up to 80 meters, crossed the ridge, and dove for the far side. For 3 seconds, the exhaust was silhouetted against the gray December sky. The Duran's camera caught it perfectly. Bright, moving fast, and unmistakably hot. The operator's hands moved. The first command opened the launch cover as the servo motor swung the protective cap clear. The tri-channel seeker began scanning. The second command aligned the drone. The Duran banked, pointing its spine toward the target bearing. The seeker found the exhaust immediately. Ultraviolet, infrared, and mid-infrared signals were all strong. All 3 matched an engine profile, not a flare nor a thermal reflection. It was a real target. The third command was to fire. The solid fuel motor ignited with 20 Gs of acceleration. The Duran shuddered as the missile left the airframe. The operator fought to stabilize the drone as the missile screamed toward its target. The range at launch was 7.2 kilometers. The closure rate was 850 meters per second, with a time to intercept of about 11 seconds. The Verba uses proportional navigation. The missile does not chase the target, it flies to where the target will be. It constantly adjusts its angle to cut off any escape. This is simple geometry, but extremely difficult to defeat without countermeasures. The Luty had none. No chaff, no flares, and no jamming. The drone was built for range and payload, not survivability, but it had something else. The moment the Luty crested the ridge, the Skynode S executed the next waypoint. It went nose down, throttle to idle, and dove for the terrain on the far side. It sought a stream bed that would provide acoustic shadow for the next leg. The drone was not evading the missile. It did not even know the missile existed. It was pre-programmed terrain masking. A coincidence, but a very effective one. The seeker held its lock as all 3 channels tracked the descending exhaust.
The Skynode S is
Guidance commanded a dive to match, but the missile was now flying toward the ground at 600 meters per second. The magnetic proximity fuse is designed to detonate near metal structures, but that sensitivity creates problems near terrain. Frozen ground, buried pipes, and iron-rich soil all generate faint magnetic signatures. The fuse had to distinguish these from valid targets. 9 seconds after launch, The missile was at 30 meters and still descending. The seeker was still locked.
Confirmed, sir.
At 11 seconds, the missile was at 18 meters, while the Luty was at 25 meters, pulling out of its dive. The fuse triggered, not on the drone, but on an abandoned tractor in the stream bed. The 1.5 kilogram warhead detonated on the frozen earth. Fragments scattered across the field. The Luty, 40 meters ahead and climbing, shuddered from the shockwave, but suffered no damage. The operator watched the explosion. It was the wrong position and the wrong angle. There was no debris trail. It was a miss. That was his only missile, and he had only 9 minutes of fuel remaining. The target was gone. In Krasnodar, the operator stared at his screen. After 11 months of intercepts, this was his first miss. Someone would want an explanation, but he did not have one. He chose pursuit, pushing the throttle forward while the camera tracked. The Duran could not catch the Luty. It was 35 kilometers per hour too slow. However, it could relay the position to base defenses. With 26 kilometers to Yeisk, the Luty had survived detection and a missile strike through luck and programming. Ahead lay the hardest part. It had to find one specific aircraft among dozens, using an AI that had never seen this target from this angle. The Luty had to find the IL-38N. It had to ignore the standard IL-38 parked just 80 meters away. It had to hit precisely enough for the airburst warhead to destroy the sensor section, not just damage the airframe. If you look at the two aircraft, you will see why this is difficult. Both have 4 turboprop engines, high-mounted wings, and long fuselages in similar gray paint. From 35 meters altitude, at a slant angle, they are nearly identical. The difference is on top of the forward fuselage. The IL-38N carries the NV9 Elint pod, a boxy structure roughly 2 meters long. It is mounted on external struts above the cockpit. ELINT stands for Electronic Intelligence. The pod contains passive receivers that intercept radar and radio emissions. It classifies signals by frequency, pulse pattern, and origin. The standard IL-38 does not have it. That pod marked the target. Destroy the wrong aircraft, and Russia loses an $8 million trainer. Destroy the right one, and Russia loses its only Black Sea submarine hunter. The neural network running on Skynode S was trained for exactly this task. Ukrainian intelligence gathered thousands of images, including satellite photos and reconnaissance footage. Each image was labeled to teach the algorithm patterns. It learned that IL-38N aircraft have a rectangular shape above the cockpit. It learned the aspect ratio of that shape and the shadow it casts at different sun angles. During flight, the camera feeds frames to the processor at 30 per second. Each frame goes through feature extraction. The algorithm identifies edges, shapes, and geometric relationships. It looks for 4-engine aircraft first, then high-mounted wings, then the distinctive nose profile. Finally, it searches for the Elint pod. The system draws a bounding box around candidate shapes, measuring dimensions pixel by pixel. It compares data against its training set and weighs confidence. Final classification: IL-38N. Overall confidence, 94%. At 12:15 plus 8 seconds, the satellite link carried an encrypted burst. Strike authorized. There were 14 seconds to impact. But at 12:15 plus 12 seconds, the computer detected an obstacle not in its reference imagery. A ground power unit was beside the target, with an exhaust stack extending 4 meters into the approach corridor. The satellite photos were 18 hours old. Someone had moved equipment. The AI recalculated. 3 degrees right, steeper descent. That correction caused a 12-meter shift in precision. At 12:15 plus 19 seconds, the IL-38 filled the camera frame. The NV9 pod was clearly visible. Classification confidence was now 97%. At 12:15 plus 21 seconds, the radar altimeter measured 6.1 meters above a surface. The surface was the IL-38N's upper fuselage. The warhead was built for exactly this moment. If you look at the internal structure, you will understand why conventional explosives would not work. A standard bomb creates localized damage at a single point. Against a 40-meter aircraft, You might destroy one section while leaving critical systems intact. The security service of Ukraine needed to perform a lobotomy. The airburst warhead contains a central explosive charge surrounded by 2,000 steel fragments. These are cubes approximately 8 millimeters per side, packed in a polymer matrix. When the altimeter reads 6 meters, the fuse triggers. The detonation is not spherical. The explosive is shaped. Curved surfaces direct blast energy downward in a focused cone. The fragments accelerate at 1,800 meters per second. The impact pattern is roughly 4 meters in diameter. Fragment density is 40 impacts per square meter. Aluminium aircraft skin offers no resistance. At 12:15 plus 21 seconds, the warhead detonated. The fragment cone struck slightly aft of the planned aim point due to the obstacle avoidance shift. It did not matter. The NV9 pod took hundreds of direct hits. The housing was ruptured, and the antenna arrays were shredded. The pressurized forward compartment containing the NV4 mission computer was gone. The NV4 was the brain, the system that fused radar, sonar, and electronic data into a single picture. It was destroyed in 3.3 milliseconds. Secondary impacts struck the number 2 engine nacelle. Oil and fuel lines were severed, causing a fire within seconds. The IL-38N did not explode dramatically. It simply stopped being a functional aircraft. The radar still existed, but nothing could process its returns. The aircraft was not just damaged, it was lobotomized. Bye for now.